Hello, and welcome to Chapter 3 of the MedSkippers project webinar series on environmental impact reduction for professional skippers in the Mediterranean nautical sector, co-funded by the European Union's Maritime and Fisheries Fund. I am Luis Lozano from Dalula Marine, a small company in Spain specialized in sustainable blue economy. In this chapter, we will offer a very brief introduction to vulnerable marine ecosystems in the Mediterranean, as well as some basics about invasive species. As in other chapters, we will avoid excessive technical details because our objective is for skippers to identify the different types of impact their activities have on the sea and to offer enough leads for you to mitigate these according to where and how you work. Some slides contain a lot of information and some would be worth specific technical webinars on their own. In Chapter 2, we saw how the main nautical destinations in the Mediterranean coincide with biodiversity hotspots and protected areas. This is not a coincidence because, as you know, coastal ecosystems that are in good condition are usually out of the reach for most people, and that's precisely where nautical tourists like to go. So let's start talking a little about very important but very vulnerable coastal ecosystems in the Mediterranean and how nautical tourism can contribute to damage them or, on the contrary, to protect them. You should learn some basic ecology to understand this and see what you impact on and how to avoid or mitigate this damage. Among the most important and vulnerable ecosystems in the Mediterranean are those shaped up by habitat-forming species, which are those that generate the environmental resources other species need for food, shelter, and reproduction. Not mentioning salt marshes, lagoons, or coastal low forests, these are shrubs and sand-fixing plants on coastal dunes. These are very fragile but vital for protection, so don't walk on them. As we will repeat later, never make any fires and warn your clients not to downgrade or damage dunes, shrubs, or forests by using them as their summer camp toilets. Because the tidal range in the Mediterranean is minimum, unique biogenic reefs are formed along this narrow fringe. Although they have almost disappeared in many places, calcareous pink algae corniche bordering rocky shores and reefs made of tube-dwelling mollusks a little bit further away on shallow platforms used to be in the norm. Also on rocky shores, and from there on to around 25 meters or more in depth, you can find true underwater forests that in the Mediterranean are mainly made up of the brown algae Cystisoria and Sargassum. These forests are not as large as those formed by oceanic kelp, but are still key to cycle nutrients, to provide shelter, and for other animals, and to dissipate wave energy. Most typical on less exposed shores, you can find underwater meadows of the Mediterranean seagrass Posidonia, which in the clearest waters can reach down to almost 50 meters in depth and support extremely high biodiversity levels, as well as being one of the most important biological carbon sinks at global scale. Posidonia meadows also sustain directly or indirectly a significant portion of commercial fisheries, as well as maintaining water quality and transparency and protecting coasts against waves and storms. In the Mediterranean, there are also deeper algal forests formed by laminarians, but these are less frequent and less dense than those formed by seagrass or Cystisoria. Beyond the normal reach of nautical activities, but much affected by commercial and amateur extraction are, or used to be, deeper biogenic reefs formed by sponges, oysters, and mussels, as well as colonies of tube-dwelling worms, and mobile accumulations of calcareous algae called marl. Last, deep rocky shores with good environmental status often sustain superb and colorful precoralligenous and coralligenous assemblages, dominated by gorgonians and by the much sought-after red coral, overexploited for centuries. You can find good quality and extensive materials to learn about these ecosystems online, including pictures of the impact of anchoring, erosion, marine litter, hand collection, etc. As a summary, do your best to learn, reading books, online resources, or even with videos on YouTube. Today, it's easier than ever to find useful information on just about everything. Carry guides and reference materials on board for you and your clients. Never anchor on Posidonia, and don't moor or instead on the calcareous corniche. Don't collect sea stars, shells, or any other animals. And be aware that some species like sea dates and oysters are now protected. Don't buy dried up animals either, such as sponges, corals, or seahorses, or tritons trumpets, and advise your clients not to do it either. And now a little about invasive species. Beyond avoiding their transfer and learning to identify them to help scientists track their distribution, there is actually quite little you can do. Most animals and plants are designed to colonize new environments whenever they can, but today this happens so fast and at such a large scale that invasive species can have a drastic effect on local flora and fauna, taking advantage or intensifying the impact of other environmental stressors, such as pollution, habitat destruction, marine litter, excess nutrients, global warming, or growth in maritime activities, including boating, and provoking great damage on ecosystems and infrastructure. In the Mediterranean, the main pathway for invasive species has been shipping, particularly via the Suez connection to the Red Sea, through which more and more species are arriving, favored by global warming, which you can see on this screen. Shipping can carry mature and larval species from very distant regions in ballast and bilge water, and also as biofouling on hulls, pipes, and propellers. Ships can also directly transfer organisms on anchors, lines, and other gear through disturbance and transport. Other important pathways are coastal aquaculture, the global aquarium trade, and recreational fishing in the form of commercial, ornamental, and bait species imported, as well as other associated fauna and parasites. An important consideration is that invasive species are not new, and that many familiar species we may identify with the Mediterranean actually once came from very far away, as the ones here shown. Invasive species are nevertheless growingly problematic and have an impact on marine biodiversity and environmental services, on resources and fisheries, on health and security, and on critical infrastructures such as dams, power plants, and water intakes. There are lists of the most dangerous invasive species at EU, Mediterranean, and national level, and their number and variety keeps increasing. Here, we present just a few examples you might come across. Identifying them is not easy, but if you learn there are participatory citizen science programs you could collaborate with, and this applies to land and freshwater species too. Fish. Most are native to the Red Sea. Actually, invasive species that come through man-made structures are called deceptions, after the man in charge of the Suez Canal. Pufferfish are particularly dangerous because they now abound and are poisonous, and because they are grazing many macroalgal forests down to flat barrens in the eastern Mediterranean, around some of the very last areas of distribution of the Mediterranean monk seal. If you fish any of these, never release them back into the sea. In some places, recreational fishers and divers have been enthusiastically engaged in killing as many alien fish as possible and organizing successful mass competitions to do so. If such programs are well supervised by scientists, they can become a popular and non-conventional approach to conservation, with the potential to engage new people not usually associated with conservation NGOs. As regards algae, the killer green algae, Caulerpa toxifolia, is a textbook example of accidental and catastrophic introduction, in this case in the early 80s and by the Monaco Oceanic Museum themselves, once led by Jacques-Yves Cousteau. There are many other green, brown, and red algae now expanding in the Mediterranean, including the recent appearance of the Asian brown algae Ruglopteryx okamura around the Straits of Gibraltar, which is currently causing great alarm. As with fish, if you spot any of these weeds or bring them up with your anchor, take out as much as you can and dispose of it on land. But be cautious, because loose small fragments facilitate dispersal and can worsen the problem. Other animals that cause concern and can be identified by normal people are the blue swimming and Chinese mitten crabs, the latter more akin to brackish water, as well as biofouling tube worms and other species in lagoons, estuaries, and inland waters. In any case, and as said, invasive species control goes beyond the ability of most professional skippers of small charter boats in the Mediterranean. And because this webinar focuses on practical and doable recommendations, the only thing we can tell you is to do your best to learn about which invasive species are the most problematic in your area of action, and to consult local research and conservation organizations if there is anything you can do to help them. If you are particularly interested, as a summary, learn about invasive species anywhere you go, how to identify them, their distribution, how they propagate, and their impact. Report to local authorities and NGOs if you find any of them, what, where, and how much. If you catch invasive fish or raise any organisms on your anchor, chain, or lines, remove them carefully and dispose of them together with your organic rubbish on land. Cleanse, rinse, and sun-dry all your gear, diving equipment, and fishing tackle whenever you can. And if you sail long distances across sea basins, avoid biofouling and rinse your bilge and ballast tanks with fresh water. If you go into inland waters, never sail or use equipment in different river systems without previously removing any hitchhikers, and learn about specific legislation. River management authorities can impose very heavy fines. And that's it for now. We hope you have found this short webinar worthwhile and useful to actively engage in protecting the Mediterranean as a professional skippers. Please watch the remaining chapters and don't hesitate to contact us at the email shown on the screen. Thank you and goodbye.